Hello everyone, welcome to Swai Files, and I'm Swai. Today we're going to dive into a haunting and inexplicable disappearance. The story of Jamie Lee, a 19-year-old young man who vanished mysteriously in the deep wilderness, leaving behind countless unanswered questions. Jamie wasn't someone who usually got into trouble. He had a life on the rise, with a stable job, a loving family, and a burning passion for nature. But on one fateful night, while camping with friends, he walked into the cold darkness and never returned. The forest where he disappeared is dangerous, filled with wild animals and treacherous terrain, but Jamie knew the area well. What made him leave the group and never come back? And as if that wasn't strange enough, bizarre occurrences started happening around Jamie's family, as though some mysterious presence lingered nearby. Could something supernatural be behind this disappearance? Or is there a darker conspiracy yet to be uncovered? Join me as we step into a world of truth and mystery to uncover clues that have never been revealed. This is one story you won't want to miss. On a gentle autumn morning in September, soft sunlight filtered through the bedroom window of Jamie Lee. That day felt no different from any other. Jamie, a tall and strong 19-year-old young man, was getting ready to start his day at his welding job. His life had recently taken several positive turns, all of which were exciting. Just a few weeks earlier, he had received his very first driver's license, a milestone most teenagers eagerly look forward to. But for Jamie, it came later, not due to any medical reasons or hardships, but simply because of financial limitations. He had waited, saving every penny from his welding job, to finally buy his own car and begin his independent life. That August, Jamie also got a new car, a long-awaited dream of his. Every evening after work, he would drive to his mother's house for dinner with the family, then walk a few blocks back to the house he rented with 5 childhood friends. They had all grown up together in Grand Prairie, Alberta, a small city near the border between Alberta and British Columbia. These friendships weren't just school bonds. They had become an inseparable part of Jamie's life. Together, they shared every moment, from the joys to the struggles of youth. Jamie had a deep love for nature. Camping, fishing, and skiing were passions he couldn't live without. His family knew this well, so no one was surprised when, on September 3, 2011, Jamie decided to join his close friends for a camping trip at Smoky Flats, a place known for its beautiful, wild scenery. A river flowed through the area, trees rustled in the autumn breeze, painting a serene picture that promised a fun weekend ahead. At that time, Jamie's life seemed perfect. He had just received joyful news from his mother. His father, who had been suffering from a rare kidney disease for years, was about to be saved. His mother was going to donate her kidney to save his father, bringing immense hope to the entire family. Around 4 p.m. on September 3rd, Jamie called his mother to let her know he had finished work and was getting ready for the camping trip. He asked where the camping tents were stored in the garage, and after hearing about the successful kidney transplant plan, the two shared their happiness. For Jamie, everything seemed to be falling into place. After grabbing the tent, Jamie left home with a female friend to head to the campsite. She was just a regular friend, nothing more, and they were simply joining the trip with the other 6 close friends. They arrived at Smoky Flats around 6 p.m., a familiar spot that Jamie and his friends had visited countless times before. It was a small island in the middle of the river, a place Jamie had known since he was a child when his parents used to take him there. That evening, the air was filled with laughter and lively conversations around the campfire. Bottles of beer were opened, and joy seemed to spread across the wilds of Smoky Flats. However, amidst all the laughter, Jamie wasn't quite himself. Something seemed off. His friends noticed that Jamie was a bit different, and although he tried to hide his sadness, there was a quiet melancholy on his face as he thought about his father's illness. As the night turned into the early morning of September 4th, Jamie started to feel uncomfortable. It was 4 a.m. by then, and he decided he wanted to go home. He stood up, grabbed his keys, and headed toward his Jeep. But his friends didn't let Jamie leave that easily. They saw that he had been drinking too much, and the last thing they wanted was for Jamie to drive in that condition. One of Jamie's closest friends quickly jumped into the passenger seat, insisting that he couldn't let him go. A small argument broke out between Jamie and his friends. Jamie grew angry, feeling as if he was being controlled, being held back. "I just want to be alone," Jamie muttered in frustration. One of his bigger friends, with overwhelming strength, pulled Jamie out of the car, and in the process, Jamie accidentally hit his head on the car's metal doorframe. The bump wasn't enough to cause serious injury, but it only fueled Jamie's anger further. He stood up, shook his head vigorously, muttered something under his breath, and then turned to walk away. Jamie left the group, heading toward the thick forest, a place he had been familiar with since childhood. His friends, thinking he just needed some time to cool off, didn't worry too much. This wasn't the first time Jamie had walked off when he was angry, and he always came back after a short while. But as darkness engulfed the forest, and the faint light began to peek through the trees, a quiet unease began to creep into his friends' minds. By 5 a.m., the sky was starting to brighten, but still no sign of Jamie. His friends began to spread out, calling his name as the night slowly faded away. Their calls echoed through the trees, but there was no response. Jamie was still gone, like a ghost lost in the quiet woods. Everyone grew truly worried when, by 6 a.m., a specialized search and rescue team, coincidentally, arrived in the area for training. In the group's amazement, the search team immediately joined in the effort to find Jamie. It was an unbelievable stroke of luck, as if fate had intervened. But despite the professionals now being involved, Jamie still didn't appear. The search expanded, and when one of the sober friends decided to return home to check if Jamie had somehow gone back, their hopes began to fade. Jamie wasn't there. Urgent phone calls to Jamie's family were made, and soon enough his parents had arrived at Smoky Flats, filled with worry and clinging to the fragile hope that their son would be found. The search for Jamie began with faint glimmers of hope. At Smoky Flats, the first rays of dawn started to filter through the dense canopy, but there was no sign of Jamie. The professional search team, along with Jamie's friends and his family, organized a systematic search. They split into small groups, venturing deep into the area surrounding the campsite, calling Jamie's name, but all that answered them was the eerie silence of the wilderness. Smoky Flats itself wasn't an unfamiliar place for Jamie. Since childhood, he had camped there many times with his family, and for his close friends, it was a frequent destination for outdoor adventures. The area was surrounded by dense forests, with a river cutting through it, though at the time of Jamie's disappearance, the water level was low due to a long, dry season. However, the wild terrain made the search incredibly difficult. The forest floor was slippery, covered in dry leaves and loose rocks, posing significant challenges for the search team. As hours passed, the initial worry began to shift into despair. Search groups returned to the base without any leads on Jamie's whereabouts. By around 9 a.m., not only the rescue team, but also the local police had joined the search effort. The area became filled with rescue vehicles, police cars, and volunteers from all over the town of Grand Prairie. The more they searched, the more confusion spread as there were no clear signs of Jamie. They began to fear the worst. The shallow river where the group camped wasn't deep enough for anyone to drown, but the surrounding forest was a dangerous place, home to large predators like mountain lions. Even so, the idea that an animal attacked Jamie didn't convince his family, as Jamie had grown up knowing how to navigate the wilderness and was well aware of the dangers. The initial phase of the search focused on checking the areas Jamie might have passed through when he left the group around 4 a.m. According to his friends, Jamie had headed towards the riverbank before disappearing into the night. They believed Jamie just wanted to find a quiet place to calm down. The search team quickly scoured the riverbank and nearby areas, but there was no trace. No footprints, no personal belongings, nothing. By 11 a.m., the rescue team decided to extend the search area further, including the surrounding regions of Smoky Flats, where old trails led into the deep forest. They combed through open clearings, pushed through dense thickets, but all they found were fallen leaves and animal tracks. No sign of Jamie. Around noon, the search took a more focused turn when some members of the rescue team found a few clues. On a dirt road about a mile from the campsite, they discovered a pack of cigarettes lying on the ground. It was the brand Jamie smoked. Nearby, they also found Jamie's first aid card, which he had received from his job as a welder. These small traces brought a sliver of hope, but also added to the confusion. Why were these items scattered here on the ground? When Jamie's mother heard the news, a deep unease settled in her heart. She knew her son wasn't someone who carelessly discarded his belongings. Jamie was organized, and this didn't align with his character. However, she also remembered that Jamie often smoked, and in his intoxicated state, he might have thrown the items in frustration after realizing he didn't have a lighter. But what puzzled everyone the most was why Jamie would have thrown away his first aid card. It wasn't something he would easily lose. The search team continued scouring the area, hoping to find more signs, but there was nothing. The search area expanded further into the forest, covering trails and open clearings, but every effort seemed to lead to a dead end. The faint hopes of finding Jamie began to fade as the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the woods. By the end of the day, as the sun set and darkness once again engulfed the forest, Jamie remained missing. Exhausted and disheartened, the search teams gathered to discuss the next steps. Jamie's family, though resilient, now felt the growing fear deep inside. They knew that the chances of finding Jamie alive would decrease with each passing hour. The faint light of the next morning began to emerge over the forest, but Jamie was still nowhere to be found. The search team had spent the entire night scouring every square foot of Smoky Flats, but to no avail. Fear began to grip Jamie's family and friends. With each passing hour, the chances of finding him alive seemed to fade. But that morning, something strange began to happen. At around 6 a.m., a search dog team was brought in from a neighboring city. These dogs had been thoroughly trained to track human scents. Everyone hoped that these dogs could help find Jamie. The rescue team led the dogs to where Jamie was last seen, near the riverbank. They began sniffing around and quickly picked up a trail. The lead dog ran swiftly through the campsite, cutting through the bushes, heading straight into the forest on the other side of the river. The shallow river wasn't much of an obstacle, and the rescue team followed the dogs closely. At that moment, a new sense of hope flickered. Perhaps Jamie was still alive. Maybe he had just gotten lost and was now stuck somewhere, waiting to be rescued. But then, something strange occurred. The lead dog suddenly stopped under a large tree. It didn't continue running as everyone expected. Instead, it looked up. The search team stopped too, confused about what was happening. A search dog stopping under a tree? That wasn't normal. Why was it looking up? At first, the rescue team members thought that perhaps Jamie had climbed up the tree in a moment of panic. They began searching around the base of the tree, shining their flashlights up high, but there were no signs of Jamie. Nothing was in the tree. And even more puzzling, no one could explain how Jamie could have climbed such a tall tree in the middle of the night while drunk. Regardless, they continued searching, but the undeniable truth was that this scene left everyone feeling unsettled. That wasn't all. After the dog left the tree, Jamie's scent seemed to disappear. The next dog also tried to pick up the trail, but every effort led to nothing. An eerie sense of unease began to creep over the searchers. They continued combing through the area, but no one could figure out what had happened. Where had Jamie gone, and why had the dogs stopped at that tree? After a while, another search team decided to expand the search further. They ventured deeper into the forest, following dirt roads that led to a gravel pit about 3 miles from the campsite. There, they discovered a footprint. It wasn't just any footprint, it was the mark of a shoe. The strange thing was that the shoe print was on top of a small mound of gravel, a spot no one would have expected. Even more suspicious, the shoe print belonged to a size 13 Adidas, the exact same kind of shoes Jamie had purchased just days before he went missing. This discovery only deepened the mystery. How could Jamie have traveled so far in just a few hours? And why was there only a single footprint on top of the mound, with no other signs of movement around it? Questions surrounding these bizarre clues began to haunt the minds of those involved in the search. The rescue team continued to sweep the surrounding area, but they didn't find any other footprints. It seemed as though Jamie had vanished into thin air after leaving that single footprint on top of the mound. Every trace of him had evaporated, as if he had disappeared from this world altogether. Jamie's family, after hearing about the strange discovery, couldn't help but feel anxious. Both his mother and father were baffled, unable to make sense of the bizarre events unfolding. Jamie's mother recalled that Jamie was always very careful with his new shoes, keeping them clean and never carelessly discarding them. Jamie's father, on the other hand, remained silent, struggling to suppress the growing fear within him. As the search entered its second day, the tension mounted. The local police began asking new questions, but no one could explain the strange clues. Why did Jamie's footprint only appear once on the top of the gravel mound, without any other traces around it? Could it be that Jamie had been taken by someone? But if that were the case, why had he left no other signs behind? The rescue team didn't stop. They decided to bring in more search dogs to continue the search. This time, the second dog followed Jamie's scent to a nearby dirt road. But then the trail abruptly ended in the middle of the road. There was no sign of how Jamie had left, but the police began to suspect that he might have been picked up by a vehicle. A more troubling theory began to take shape. Jamie might have been abducted. However, there were no signs of violence or struggle at the scene. So, what had happened? Where had Jamie gone? And why were there such strange, unexplainable clues? As the search efforts continued, Jamie's family began to feel a deep sense of helplessness. They weren't just facing the pain of losing a loved one, but also the torment of unanswered questions, dead-end clues, and events that seemed to defy normal understanding. The search for Jamie was becoming more and more of a dead end, but the strange events did not stop. Every trace of Jamie seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind unanswered questions. As the search teams left Smoky Flats, they could never have imagined that the strangest part was yet to come. After several days of fruitless searching, Jamie's family returned home with heavy hearts. The faint hope that Jamie might still be alive was slowly fading. But something unbelievable happened right at their home. First, it was the strange footprints. In December that year, about 3 months after Jamie disappeared, Jamie's mother discovered footprints around her car, parked outside the museum where she worked. What sent chills down her spine was that the footprints looked very much like Jamie's shoe prints. They weren't just any shoe prints, but the Adidas size 13 shoes that Jamie had been wearing before he disappeared. The coincidence was too striking to be ignored. She immediately reported the discovery to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP. The police took samples of the footprints and sent them to Adidas for analysis. Soon, the results came back. Indeed, they were the prints of the size 13 Adidas shoes, the same type that Jamie had bought just days before he went missing. But how had these footprints appeared around her car when Jamie had been gone for 3 months? The family was consumed by confusion. What did these footprints mean? Had Jamie returned, or was someone playing a cruel joke on them? Jamie's mother became more uneasy than ever. She knew there was no way Jamie could have returned without contacting the family. But the presence of those footprints, identical to her son's, kept her mind racing with thoughts of what was really happening. That wasn't the end of it. Shortly after discovering the footprints, another strange event occurred. This time, it happened right at the family's home. One winter morning, as the family was preparing for the day, Jamie's father went outside to check on the car. They had a habit of plugging in the heater on cold nights to ensure the engine didn't freeze. But that morning, their car wouldn't start. They checked the battery, but it was fine. What was strange was that throughout that winter, the battery in Jamie's family's car kept mysteriously dying. Even though they replaced the battery and had it checked multiple times, the issue persisted. It had never happened before, and there was no reasonable explanation. But this was just the beginning of a series of odd occurrences the family would face. A few weeks later, Jamie's mother returned home after a long day at the museum and found an unusual bouquet of flowers placed right outside her back door. These weren't flowers commonly found in the area, but were yellow daisies, tall flowers from the distant mountains of Alberta. This sent a shiver down her spine because Jamie knew that his mother loved these flowers from their trips to the mountains when he was young. And then, a year after Jamie's disappearance, the same bouquet appeared again. By this point, the family began to feel as if someone was watching them. Could Jamie still be alive, trying to communicate with them somehow? Or was it someone else, someone who knew about Jamie's disappearance and was deliberately toying with them? Every little sign, from the footprints to the flowers, plunged the family into a state of anxiety and despair. They didn't know whether these were good signs or bad ones, but one thing was certain: Jamie's disappearance wasn't simply a case of getting lost or an accident. The strange events continued. One night, Jamie's father and brother heard strange noises at the back door. They rushed out, but no one was there. However, what frightened them was that the chair near the door had a wet spot, as if someone had just sat there. Though they searched around the house, they found nothing. The same thing happened again a second time, and the family began to suspect that something beyond their understanding was happening. In 2013, another strange incident took place. When Jamie's mother returned home after work one day, she found a small jade piece left on the table in the front yard. The piece was crudely carved, but when looked at closely, it resembled Jamie's face. This discovery stirred mixed emotions within the family. Who had left the jade piece there? And why did it resemble Jamie? These strange phenomena continued for 10 years after Jamie's disappearance. Although the police couldn't find any clear clues, Jamie's family couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there somewhere, trying to reach them in inexplicable ways. However, the big question remained: where did Jamie really go? And were these strange signs a message from him, or merely the cruel tricks of fate? As the strange events continued, Jamie's family gradually felt that what was happening was beyond ordinary understanding. The mysterious footprints, the yellow daisies, the wet chair, and the crudely carved jade piece resembling Jamie had planted indescribable doubts in their minds. Were these phenomena signs of something supernatural, or was Jamie still alive and trying to send signals to his family? These thoughts increasingly haunted Jamie's parents, especially his mother. After discovering the strange jade piece in 2013, Jamie's mother couldn't stop thinking about its true meaning. Why was Jamie's face carved on such a crude piece of jade? Who had done this, and for what purpose? The presence of the jade made her feel as if there was some connection between her and Jamie, but it was a vague, elusive connection. She sensed that there was something deeper, something beyond human sight. Sleepless nights began to occur more frequently for Jamie's mother. She would wake up in the middle of the night with a feeling that someone was watching her. The soft sounds from behind the house, the wind blowing through the curtains, it all seemed to carry messages from another world. She wondered if Jamie was still alive, and if he was, where could he be? One night, Jamie's mother awoke around 3 a.m., a time often referred to as the witching hour, and felt a presence in the house. There was no sound, no clear sign, but she sensed a cold air flowing into the room. In that moment, she believed Jamie was somewhere near, not in this world, but in another realm, trying to communicate with her. She felt a strong connection to her son, but had no way of understanding the true meaning of the messages she believed he was trying to send. Jamie's family wasn't the only one who felt that something strange was happening. Jamie's friends, who had gone camping with him on the night he disappeared, also began to experience puzzling events. One of them, Mark, shared that one evening, while he was home alone, he felt someone standing behind him. When he turned around, there was no one there, but the feeling of being watched sent chills down his spine. It reminded him of the last moments he had spent with Jamie before he vanished. Mark recalled that on that night, Jamie wasn't acting like himself. He wasn't just drunk. He seemed haunted by something unseen, something he couldn't express. Mark wasn't the only one with this feeling. Another friend, Sarah, also shared that after Jamie's disappearance, she had a strange dream. In the dream, she saw Jamie standing by the river, but he wasn't looking at her. Instead, Jamie stared intently at a shadowy figure in the distance, as if he was being drawn toward it, unable to escape. Sarah tried calling out to Jamie, but he didn't hear her. She woke up feeling lost and confused, unable to explain what the dream meant. These events gradually led Jamie's family and friends to consider things they had never believed in before. They began seeking help from spiritual experts, people who could communicate with the other side. A séance was arranged at Jamie's family home in hopes of finding clues about where he might have gone. At the séance, an elderly woman known for her ability to communicate with spirits sat before a small altar with Jamie's picture. The air in the room felt thick with tension, and the faces of those present showed the weight of their anticipation. The woman began to murmur, her eyes closed as if connecting with the invisible world. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as everyone waited for her to speak. Finally, she opened her eyes, but it was as if she was looking at something beyond this world. She spoke slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Jamie. He is no longer here, but his spirit has not moved on. He is being held back, unable to cross over." Her words shocked Jamie's family. Held back? Who or what was holding Jamie back? Everyone began asking questions, but the woman just shook her head, as if the answer was beyond her understanding. After the séance, Jamie's family felt even more torn by unanswered questions. If Jamie was dead, why couldn't he rest in peace? And if he was still alive somewhere, why hadn't he returned home? These thoughts haunted the family, pulling them deeper into a world of mystery and the supernatural. The search for Jamie was no longer just a physical one. It had become a search for his soul, a search for the meaning behind the strange phenomena surrounding his disappearance. And the most terrifying part was that they might never find the answers. The series of strange events left Jamie's family living in a constant state of tension. After the séance, Jamie's mother often felt as if she was being watched. Every time she entered the house, a cold draft seemed to creep through the doors and dark corners. But what truly haunted her wasn't just the odd occurrences in reality. It was the dreams. Each night, when Jamie's mother drifted into sleep, she was pulled into nightmares involving her son. In the dreams, she saw Jamie lost in a hazy, fog-covered space, where everything around him was shrouded in thick mist. Jamie didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at her with empty eyes, arms reaching out as if pleading for help. She tried to run toward him, but every time she reached out to touch Jamie, he vanished, dissolving into the fog. She woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. These dreams repeated themselves night after night, and the unease in her heart grew stronger. She began to believe that Jamie was trying to communicate with her through the dreams. He couldn't speak, but there was something urgent, something that made her feel he was trapped somewhere and needed help. One day, she decided to seek out a dream researcher, someone well known for interpreting the hidden messages within dreams. This woman, renowned for her unique ability to read dreams, listened carefully as Jamie's mother recounted what she had been experiencing. When she finished her story, the woman sat quietly for a long time, her eyes distant, deep in thought. Finally, she looked directly at Jamie's mother and said, "These dreams aren't just your imagination. They are signs that Jamie's soul hasn't left this world. He is trapped between two worlds, unable to move on." "But how?" Jamie's mother whispered, unable to understand. She had never believed in the supernatural, but now everything was making her question her beliefs. The woman explained that sometimes when someone dies suddenly or under mysterious circumstances, their soul can become stuck in a state of transition. They may not realize they've died, or something may be holding them back, some kind of unexplainable tether. And this, she said, might be happening to Jamie. The confusion in Jamie's mother only deepened as the strange occurrences began happening not only in the family's home, but also in the daily lives of Jamie's friends. One evening, Mark, one of Jamie's closest friends, who had been with him the night he disappeared, was driving along the dirt road that led to Smoky Flats. He had decided to return there, as if seeking some clue for himself. As he drove near the open field where they had camped, Mark sensed something was wrong. The air around him felt heavy, and suddenly a cold gust of wind blew through the car, sending a chill down his spine. The confusion in Jamie's mother only deepened as the strange occurrences began happening not only in the family's home, but also in the daily lives of Jamie's friends. One evening, Mark, one of Jamie's closest friends who had been with him the night he disappeared, was driving along the dirt road that led to Smoky Flats. He had decided to return there, as if seeking some clue for himself. As he drove near the open field where they had camped, Mark sensed something was wrong. The air around him felt heavy, and suddenly, a cold gust of wind blew through the car, sending a chill down his spine. Stopping the car by the side of the road to look around, he saw something he couldn't believe. There were large footprints, as if someone had stepped deeply into the dry ground. They looked identical to the shoe prints Jamie had left behind on the night he vanished. Mark got out of the car, his heart racing, his eyes following the footprints. They led him deeper into the woods, along narrow trails that only someone familiar with the area would know. Each step seemed to heighten his anxiety and fear. The tall trees loomed over him, as if watching his every move, and the silence of the forest grew increasingly ominous. After following the footprints for some time, Mark arrived at a large tree, the same tree where the search dogs had stopped during the rescue mission years before. A sense of dread washed over him. He looked up at the tree, and while he didn't see anything there, he felt as though Jamie was somewhere nearby, close yet impossibly distant. Mark returned to his car in a state of confusion. Although he didn't want to believe it, everything pointed to the fact that something beyond reality was happening here. Meanwhile, Jamie's mother began to realize that to understand what was happening, she needed to return to the place where Jamie disappeared. Although she knew it would be a painful journey, she believed that only by facing the truth could she help free Jamie, or at least free herself from the haunting questions surrounding her son's death. When Jamie's mother and Mark met again, they shared what they had experienced. Both felt that everything was gradually leading them towards something terrifying and mysterious. But they also knew that they had to continue on this journey, no matter what might be waiting for them ahead. After weeks of living in the shadows of dreams, strange phenomena, and the helpless feeling of not being able to understand what had happened to Jamie, his mother decided to take a bold step. She would return to Smoky Flats, the place where her son had disappeared on that fateful night. It wasn't just a journey to seek answers, but a way to confront the pain and haunting memories that had lingered for so long. She believed that only by going back to where it all began could she find answers to the questions that had plagued her mind. Mark, Jamie's close friend, volunteered to go with her. He couldn't let Jamie's mother face the cold, eerie forest alone. Moreover, Mark had been haunted by the strange events that had occurred since the night Jamie disappeared. The shoe prints he found, the feeling of being watched, and the strange dreams that kept pulling him back to this place. The two set off from Grand Prairie early in the morning, with the crisp autumn air blowing through the car windows. On the drive, both Jamie's mother and Mark spoke little. There wasn't much need for conversation, as both were lost in their own thoughts about what might await them at Smoky Flats. In their hearts, the faint hope that Jamie might still be alive had been worn down by years without any clues, yet they couldn't entirely let go of the thought. As they approached the campsite, a chill seemed to fill the car. The dirt road leading into Smoky Flats was nearly unchanged since the night Jamie disappeared. The towering trees, the thick bushes along the roadside, and the dry riverbed where Jamie's group had set up camp were still there. But now everything seemed more desolate and eerie. Mark parked the car near the river, and he and Jamie's mother stepped out, the forest floor feeling heavier beneath their feet than ever before. The silence around them was unnerving, broken only by the sound of wind rustling the leaves in the trees and the crunch of fallen leaves beneath their feet. They began walking along the trail Jamie had taken when he left the group that night. Each step echoed in the stillness, adding to the weight of the moment. When they reached the large tree where the rescue team had found traces of Jamie, and where the search dog had stopped, Jamie's mother halted and stared at the towering trunk. In that moment, she felt as if an invisible thread connected her to the tree, as though it held a secret she had been searching for all these years. She placed her hand on the rough bark, feeling its cold, dry texture, yet at the same time, a wave of strong emotions surged through her. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and tried to listen for any signal from the invisible world where she believed Jamie was trapped. Mark stood a few steps away, remaining silent to respect Jamie's mother's private moment, but as he looked around, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't the presence of the tree or the forest, It was the air around them. A suffocating feeling, as though the very atmosphere was pressing down on them, filled the space. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through, strong enough to stir the leaves, making them rustle loudly across the forest. Both Jamie's mother and Mark felt the shift in the air. But the strangest part was when they looked down at the ground, their footprints were no longer clear. It was as if the earth beneath them had shifted, as though time in this place wasn't following the usual rules. Jamie's mother turned to Mark, her eyes filled with confusion. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark only nodded, unable to speak. They both sensed the presence of something unseen, something that didn't belong to the world they knew. In the stillness of that moment, an unexpected sound echoed from the distance. The noise was like footsteps crunching on dry leaves, drawing closer to them. Both Mark and Jamie's mother turned toward the sound, frozen in place. They waited, hearts pounding in their chests. A figure slowly emerged from the distance, walking deliberately through the shadowy forest. The person wore a dark coat, tall and thin, and the way he walked looked eerily familiar, like Jamie. Jamie's mother raised her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide in shock. "Jamie?" she gasped, her voice a mixture of hope and fear. Mark couldn't believe his eyes either, but he was paralyzed, frozen with terror. The figure stopped a short distance from them, bathed in the faint light of the fading afternoon. But it wasn't Jamie. It was a stranger, with empty eyes and a hollow gaze, as if he didn't truly exist in this place. The man stood still for a moment, then turned and disappeared back into the dark woods, leaving Jamie's mother and Mark standing there in shock and confusion. The terrifying moments that had just unfolded made them realize that this forest was hiding a secret far more horrifying than they could have imagined. This wasn't just the place where Jamie had disappeared. It was a place where forces beyond human understanding held sway. As darkness slowly enveloped the Smoky Flats forest, an eerie silence hung in the air, keeping Jamie's mother and Mark on edge. They stood there, eyes fixed on the spot where the strange man had vanished, but neither dared to take another step. The presence of that stranger, with his empty eyes and hollow stare, seemed like a warning that some things in this forest were never meant to be uncovered. After a long moment of silence, Jamie's mother began to tremble. The emotions she had kept bottled up for so long, from the pain of losing her son to the exhaustion of dealing with these strange occurrences, finally burst forth. She collapsed, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She had searched for so long, hoped for so much, but it seemed that all her efforts only led to dead ends. Mark quickly knelt beside her, trying to comfort her with the calmness he usually possessed. "We've done everything we can," he said, though even he felt those words were hollow. They had come here seeking answers, but all they found was confusion, fear, and things that defied understanding. They sat there for a long time, neither speaking, letting the silence consume them. The entire forest seemed to be watching them, quiet and mysterious. Gentle winds rustled through the treetops, as if whispering secrets that no one could quite hear. Finally, Jamie's mother stood up, her eyes red but filled with resolve. "We need to leave," she said, her voice firmer than ever. "Jamie may no longer be here, but whatever is holding my son back, that is beyond our control." Mark nodded, realizing that perhaps it was time to accept the painful truth. Jamie would never come back. They had done all they could, but the strange events, the unexplainable signs, and the presence of that mysterious man all pointed to the fact that invisible forces were manipulating Jamie's fate. What had happened to Jamie seemed to have crossed the boundary of the world they could understand. As they made their way back to the car, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they had come close to uncovering a part of the truth, a dark and dangerous truth. He looked back at the forest one last time before driving away, his mind heavy with unanswered questions. On the drive back, Jamie's mother sat in silence, staring distantly out of the car window. She knew that her life would never be the same again. Everything she had once believed about the world had been shattered. But despite the pain, she also understood that there were some mysteries that never needed to be solved. And perhaps that was the best way to preserve Jamie's memory, as a part of her life, but not something to chase after in desperation. The search for Jamie had spanned over a decade, But in the end, she realized that there were questions that would never be answered and mysteries that needed to be accepted rather than understood. Jamie, whether alive or dead, had been swallowed by the forest, taken to a place where those left behind could never follow. The strange phenomena, the dreams, and the unexplained clues were all part of a world beyond human control. As the lights of Grand Prairie came into view on the horizon, Jamie's mother returned to the present. She would never stop loving Jamie, but she also knew that some things were not meant to be pursued. She had once believed she would find Jamie, but now she understood that her real journey wasn't to find her son. It was to learn how to accept the loss, no matter how painful it was. And as night finally fell, the story of Jamie Lee remained, with its secrets buried deep in the heart of the Smoky Flats forest. The forest would stay silent, a witness to things beyond human comprehension. The answers, if they existed, would forever remain in the shadows, never to be unraveled.